This man who from the mortal coil was torn took no heed of the demon's might, for while the 6 shall unite at morn, the 7 shall fall at night.
Welcome to Kit Katastrophe. My name is Kit, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers Siege Voyager class Autobot Springer. This figure came out in 2019 as part of Wave 3 of the Voyager assortment. Starting off in Springer's terrestrial alternate mode, it's clear to see that this new Siege design takes heavy inspiration from the original design from Generation 1. The armored car mode is very boxy and strong, with a very wide front section, although the rear end looks anemic in comparison. This thing rides considerably low to the ground, and coupled with the strong front end with the fender forks, this vehicle mode can most aptly be described as a battering ram. Those front fenders suggest this, considering they're scratched and pockmarked with some silver weathering effects. The same weathering effects can be seen on the hood and on the roof, which is also coated in a nice matte forest green. That reminds me, the color placement on this figure is actually really nice. The yellow is reserved for the front bumper and the rear engine detailing, while the green makes up most of the rest of the body. A pale bluish gray dominates the rear third of the car. Attempting to give this vehicle mode a semblance of speed and agility are the 2 radio aerials sprouting up from the stubby rear end. From a certain angle, they remind me of an Emperor Sea Strider. Springer has one weapon dedicated for this mode in particular, the DEW Mega Missile Launcher, which is essentially just all of Springer's errant accessories jammed together to form one unit, which is admirable from a weapon storage perspective. Transformation from cruiser mode to helicopter mode isn't too terribly difficult once you get the hang of things, though I hardly found the instructions helpful the first couple times. The instructions ask you to extend the torso, which is something you are not supposed to do. Anyway, the gist of the scheme is extending the legs and turning them inside out while you bring the arms back from their forward position. I do like how the 2 fins from car mode peg together to form the helicopter's tail, and what will become the robot mode arms have some extra panels that fold out and flip around to form winglets. Lastly, take apart the missile launcher and form the rotor. Despite not much actually changing between both alternate modes, Springer succeeds in having a distinct helicopter mode. At least, it's a far cry more distinct than the original, though that's not nearly as distinct as the Thrilling 30 figure. This chopper is still very broad and flat, though the rear end tapers more gracefully. If any of you in the audience has read the first Formic War trilogy by Orson Scott Card, this is pretty much what I imagined when he described the anti-gravity helicopter thing. It's been a while since I read them. Now, before you leave a comment, yes, I know one of the blades on my copy is warped. It's been like that since I got him out of the packaging, and I haven't had the motivation to fix it. I don't know how to fix it, but maybe soak it in some boiling water and leave it under something heavy for a while, I guess. Just remember, I'm not responsible for you damaging your figures after taking advice from someone who admits he doesn't know what he's talking about. That being said, the rotor itself spins really well. Look at it go. The remainder of the car mode turret can split into 2 small guns, the JF-10 Warp Blaster and the C-10EM Void Blast Capacitor. I don't remember which is which, and I've lost the instructions. Either way, they peg into the sides just above the winglets, and one of the guns has a tab meant to notch into the winglet. These definitely help give Springer some added firepower. Taking off the accessories once more, the transformation into robot mode is fairly complex mechanically, but is overall pretty simple. The hardest parts are untapping the torso from the waist for it to extend, and then securing all the tabs and locks to keep the arms in place. The legs also don't particularly like to stay locked in position, but that's a discussion better kept for the articulation segment. Much like going in between vehicle modes, the process isn't too difficult once you start to get the hang of things, but it is a steep learning curve. Much like the Thrilling 30 Springer figure was startlingly accurate to his design from the IDW comics, so does this figure for the original Generation 1 cartoon. Siege Springer is 100% bright green boxes and baby blue curves. He looks just as stunning as the Thrilling 30 figure, but for different reasons. He's remarkably clean for such a busy transformation, and especially for a mainline figure. The worst looking part of him is the backs of his legs, which are pretty gap-ridden and full of structural struts and the like. You might have noticed some hot pink shining within. That's because I stuffed fire drive's effect pieces into Springer's calves to provide him with some stability. Again, I'll discuss that further in the articulation segment. Moving back to the positives, the head sculpt is dead on for Springer, featuring his tri-pointed crown and his dashing roguish face. Those two guns from helicopter mode can be combined, and I don't think there's a name for it, but this is my preferred configuration for giving Springer some handheld firepower. For a melee, Springer has two W10 air-sliced chopper blades, which can also be stored on two tabs on his backpack. As for the main rotor chunk, I just keep it on his back, at least on the shelf. However, with all these accessories, you'll be sure to have a lot of possible options for display.
Springer continues the Siege tradition of being very fucking posable, but he has so many issues with his articulation that I think it rather drags him down quite a bit. Starting at the head, he has a nice big ball joint that can go out in all directions. It can nod pretty well, but not, too well. He can just look up. He can look a little down, and of course he can go side to side and wobble back and forth for more subtle ranges of motion. His shoulders swivel this far forward until they bang on something. I'm not sure what. I think it's something to do with the inner mechanisms of the shoulders themselves, and they go forward, or rather backward, all that far. So it's not a 360 degree range of motion, but it is pretty good for pretty much anything that you really need. And they do go outwards, so that despite his big shoulder pauldrons, he can almost
T-pose.
He has a bicep swivel that does go all the way around, which is pretty good. And he has an elbow joint that can curl more than 90 degrees, which is very good. And he has a wrist swivel, which is something that I usually forget to point out on most figures. At the waist, he can spin in this range of motion. Unfortunately, the hinge back here prohibits even further degrees of architude with which to move, but that's okay, because honestly, how much further do you need him to twist? Like, really? His legs move forward. His legs move forward pretty appreciably, and they move backwards just as well. And they do that thing I like where the skirt piece actually moves with the leg rather than getting out of the way of the leg. It's a very elegant solution. The legs do go all the way out, especially due to transformation, so he can scrape his taint on the floor like a dog, and he has a thigh rotation that goes all the way around, also due to transformation. Now, here's where shit goes south. See, he has a knee joint, and it bends really far. That's a nice curl for a knee joint, but the joint is a little tight, and there is a transformation joint in the area that is easier to move, so when you try to move his knee without putting the force near the joint itself, you'll just end up disengaging his transformation joint, which is really frustrating, and it's pretty loose, so you have to be really careful with how you put the force on the joint, or else it'll just look like he's broken his leg. At the foot, he has an ankle pivot that goes really far. That is just a straight up broken ankle. And look, he has a bloody little stump. Let's remove these so I can illustrate a point in a minute. And they move forward and backward pretty well, so he can do some really deep kneeling poses or walking poses or whatever poses you want. But these things are pretty loose, and the support for them is all the way up here, and all the weight's supposed to go all the way back here, meaning that if you put any weight on it, it'll just move backwards. And when you have a figure with a backpack like this, just top heavy in general, it's gonna be... You can get him to stand. Like, see, here, he's standing on his own 2 feet. I don't have the stuffings in his legs, but it's really easy to knock him over. So that means he's very unstable. So I really, really suggest if you want a Springer, pick up a fire drive to get these two little stuffers, or just, find something around the house that's about this size and has about this strength to stuff up his cavities. Or else your Springer is not going to have a spring in his step.
As much as I want to hail Siege Springer as the best Voyager, or even best figure in the line, and trust me, he can be argued as such, he just has some very huge issues that ruin the overall experience for me. Sure, all three modes are astounding, his posability is great, and his aesthetic is flawless, but with those gammy knees and his pathetic ankles, he falls flat in more ways than one. I do recommend this figure just for the engineering alone, but those issues I mentioned make the recommendation milder than I'd like. If you have a fire drive on you, definitely take the plunge, otherwise, just prop him up from behind, yeah? This has been Katastrophe. Transform and roll out.